What's the latest on OBJ's free agency?
Ryan, we heard from Bruce Arians, the Buccaneers coach yesterday, who says he doesn't need OBJ when he's got AB, but I think there are other teams that believe they do need OBJ and would like to sign him here in the coming days. And we heard Diana Rossini mention the Chiefs, Packers, Saints. I think the Patriots, Seahawks also probably have been in touch with some point or another. And so Odell Beckham Jr. is going to have his options. Now, my understanding is he's told teams that it could take a couple of days here before he makes his decision. He certainly doesn't sound in any rush to make a decision. This is the first time that he gets to choose his own team. He didn't choose to go to the Giants. He didn't choose to go to the Browns, but he will get to choose his next team. I've always maintained from a common sense standpoint that he'll sign by Saturday, 4 p.m., because if he does, he gets paid for this week. And if he doesn't, he lets a week of salary get by while trying to make that decision. Now, I have had another team say, well, maybe he wants to wait this week to see how certain teams fare, because if the Chiefs were to lose this upcoming weekend, if the Saints were to lose this upcoming weekend, that might change the way that he would view one of those situations. But right now, I don't know that he is the exact offer that he wants. He's still sifting through it. And so we'll continue to wait, and I still believe that we'll have a decision before Saturday at 4 o'clock, but I am basing that off the common sense financial aspect of it.
But it is such an interesting point, Adam, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because that's what most of us want to do, right? We want to make sure we get paid, and he does that by signing on Saturday. So, Bart, I'll start with you. Which of these three teams makes the most sense, is the best fit for OBJ? Packers, Chiefs, Saints.
It's Green Bay, and it's not even close, right? When you talk about, being able to go to a quarterback that can understand the nuance, right? Going to a place where it is balls to be had, right? Devontae Adams gets about 12 targets a game. Okay, just give me 3 or 4, and that's going to be more targets than what he's used to getting. And also, you get to go with one of the best, if not the best quarterback in the game, especially on schedule, off schedule, a guy that's seen it all. And I think, talk about a division leader, I think the MVP of the league right now is Aaron Rodgers, just because you saw how bad Jordan Love was, that you saw how important he was. I think you go there, and it's not even close. I think you have concerns about Kansas City and their ability to make some noise. OBJ needs to make his fame. He's made his name in the regular season. He needs to make his fame in the postseason when he can go up and he can be put on a pedestal.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to perform. He shows out. That next contract looks really good. Lewis, what do you think OBJ could bring to the Packers if, in fact, he goes there?
Well, I think he's a three-tool player, a three-position player. He could play the X, the Z, the E, line up in the slot. He's a guy who's always been a good catch-and-run type of receiver. Going back to his days in New York, that's really what you worried about with him the most, was him getting the ball to him quickly and then him just ripping you in the open field with his open field running ability. Top end speed may not be like it once was, but I think because of how strong the running game is in Green Bay, because of how strong the play-action passing game is, and because of the fact that when he's on the field with Lazard and would be on the field with Devontae, the coverage probably is going to be tilted towards Devontae, so he's going to have a lot of favorable one-on-one matchups and a lot of space to work. So I think for him, as long as he understands that, look, Devontae's number 1 and he's 1A or number 2, and as Devontae says, as long as he's good with 2 targets instead of 1, he's good to go from a team perspective. If he wants to be a true number 1, if he wants to be the guy, then maybe none of these teams that we're looking at, other than New Orleans, as far as the top 3 that we're saying that are on his wish list, are really the best fit. Then we may be talking about like a team up there in Foxborough. But who knows? We'll have to see what he wants and what he's after.
Okay, that could be interesting. Damien, he's talking about Foxborough, and that reminds me of Randy Moss, right? I think about OBJ, and he's got that kind of skill, at least he did in the past. Could he have a Randy Moss kind of impact or resurgence with a new team?
First of all, Lewis, stop stealing my material, all right? Stop stealing my material, Lewis. No, listen, when we talk about Randy Moss type, remember, we could make the case Randy Moss should win league MVP. Yeah. When he came back. I'm not putting OBJ in that category because Randy Moss is one of one in my opinion.
Okay.
But what I will say is I think OBJ right now is living more off reputation than more production. I think it's imperative for him to get into a system where he could be utilized the most. And I think that place Lewis hit it right on the head is New England.
Of course.
When you look at New England right now, I want to get New England. When you look at New England right now, okay, when you look at New England right now, particularly on offense, they don't have a number one receiver. Yes, they signed Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne, but they're not OBJ. They got a strong running game. They need a alpha on the outside where Mac Jones can look to that guy for explosive plays. Now, I know OBJ hasn't produced that many explosive plays over the past couple seasons. He only had seven catches for 20 yards plus over the last 2 seasons. But I think in New England, with Bill Belichick being able to know how to define roles for players, I think that environment up there for him, that could be, to me, the igniter as far as kickstarting his career.
It's an interesting point. The only concern I would have is we remember the issues he sort of had with Baker Mayfield. Mac Jones still learning on the job. It's like, how do you balance that? Would OBJ like that situation? Adam, I'll give you the final word.
Well, listen, I don't know that Mac Jones is Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield's Mac Jones. If he were to look at New England, he would be buying into the culture, the environment, the coaching staff, all the things he could do there, the ways that they could win. And the Patriots are coming on strong. Again, if you are subscribing to the theory that he wants to wait to see how this weekend's games come out, well, it looks like New England is poised to make a run in the second half, which would make that situation appealing. But I think he's sitting back right now trying to sift through it. He doesn't appear to be in a great rush at this moment. But he's got some good options, and we'll see which one he decides to choose and what matters most to him, which we don't exactly know right now.
Yeah, the longer we wait, the longer he waits, I should say, the more we talk about him, that's for sure. All right.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.